If you look into carbon markets or any of this other stuff, I mean, the reason they've been failing is because they're exposed time and time again as scams. So now the new thing is to frame them as high integrity carbon markets. We need high integrity carbon markets, but you're never going to get a freaking high integrity carbon market when it's criminal bankers making them up. Because criminal bankers do one thing, and that's steal. He
100%.
stole from regular lower and middle class Americans to make the greatest trade ever.
Right.
And I don't necessarily see that as appealing when you have over, arguably, definitely before the year 2000, but since then, so many orchestrated wealth transfers and robbery of people's wealth time and again, and no accountability. And this is the person that you'd like to put in charge of the Treasury, and that's been the most floated.
Carbon markets, often hailed as a solution to climate change, have repeatedly failed to live up to their promises. Despite the push for high-integrity markets, many of these systems have been exposed as nothing more than elaborate scams, leaving the public disillusioned. The problem lies in the architects of these markets, bankers and financiers with questionable ethics, who, instead of prioritizing environmental solutions, are primarily focused on their profits. Their actions have resulted in massive wealth transfers, siphoning resources from lower and middle-class Americans, all while evading accountability. In an interview, investigative journalist Whitney Webb reveals the staggering irony. She believes the very individuals responsible for orchestrating these financial systems are often the ones proposed to hold the keys to public wealth, such as in positions like the Treasury. With such a deeply flawed foundation, it's no surprise that carbon markets and the broader financial system continue to face intense scrutiny. Until transparency and accountability are at the forefront, the cycle of exploitation will only continue, undermining trust in the very systems designed to protect the planet and its people. Let's watch clips from Whitney Webb's explosive interview to gain more insight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
And so, as I understand it, and a lot of, rhetoric I've heard in the Bitcoin space for years is that fiat is terrible. It's broken money. We need to move on from fiat. And so hearing things like that from Lummis, hearing Trump at the Bitcoin conference say, actually, the Bitcoin and the dollar are not competing. Bitcoin is going to strengthen the dollar and all of this stuff. I think it should be a harbinger for concern for people that don't want a debt-based monetary future. And unfortunately, it's essentially been admitted that, the next president, who we know now will be Trump, is going to face some sort of U.S. government debt crisis. And of course, that debt crisis is the consequence of wildly irresponsible fiscal policy, right? And so what I am concerned about is that there will be no accountability for that. There is a plan to use things that were meant, or at least pitched, as destroying fiat and the debt-based monetary system, will be used instead to usher in a newer version of it that, as Mark pointed out earlier, it will likely be deflationary, but only because they've stolen all of the assets and really most things of value. So at that point, they do want a deflationary system because they have hoarded all of the wealth, and they don't want their wealth to inflate away now that they hold almost all of the cards. Right. And so, what concerns me there then is the stable coin play, as we said it for, a long time. Stable coins have the potential to be just as programmable and surveillable as a CBDC could be. And the Fed and the national security community, meaning, the CIA, among other agencies, have been very open that stable coins will ensure dollar hegemony. And you have, stable coins like Tether, for example, saying that we're a partner of U.S. dollar hegemony. And, Trump with the, his family's, stable coin project having recently come out. It's about having globalizing
I don't think that's
the dollar.
Gonna get much adoption.
Well, no, maybe not that necessarily, but it shows that the intent is to globalize the dollar and essentially use dollar stable coins, not that aren't necessarily directly issued by the U.S. government, but will be regulated by it, to become, essentially a de facto world currency. That's essentially the push. And, it's essentially been happening relatively quietly for some time in economies that are dramatically unstable and have been made unstable by entities like the IMF, for example, which, the U.S. military refers to the IMF as a financial weapon of military power of the United States government. Right. Yeah. And so, and then Argentina, of course, a lot of people are using Tether because their local currency is no good. And that's happening in other places around the world that have also been subjected, to essentially financial warfare by these same predatory, again, debt slavery model based institutions. And so will this actually improve the situation? Will it prevent future irresponsible fiscal policy if this is what ultimately ends up happening? It will come down to people resisting that and saying, no, that's not okay. If really it is true that people in the Bitcoin space are opposed to debt slavery and a debt-based monetary paradigm, which is what I have heard for a long time, and I absolutely agree with that. And I am also concerned about the introduction now of climate finance as a way to use carbon market schemes or other forms of carbon pricing, or some of these efforts to securitize the natural world, like one that was we recently wrote about the Amazon rainforest, for example, being securitized by the guy that invented ETFs. And used to be, head of BlackRock's global investments or something like that. That these are going to be used as different places to shovel debt, because if you have a huge debt crisis, you're looking for things to, shovel the debt into to make your debt problem go away. And so, as we've talked about, I think starting, maybe 3 years ago, Marty, on your show, I've been on talking about this effort a while, right?
At least 5.
Yeah, an effort to securitize, the natural world and create this new asset class, that these groups that back this call nature's economy, because they can, essentially quadruple or quintuple the amount of assets in the current economy and basically keep the existing casino model that Wall Street and these criminal banks have, go on forever. They need that new asset class to keep their models going. That generate them a lot of money. And the fact that, there's all these efforts from people like Lummis and Gillibrand and others that want to support the dual banking system that rewards irresponsible government fiscal policy and criminal acts of the private banks. I'm concerned about that. And the fact that, in Trump's administration in particular, you have someone like Howard Lutnick closely tied to Tether, but also very connected to ESG, the Sustainable Development Goals. Cantor Fitzgerald has an entire fund dedicated to implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? Which includes, by the way, digital ID as part of that, and programmable surveillable money, linking a digital ID to some sort of CBDC or UBI biometric wallet and all of this stuff. This is in the SDGs. He's, on the board of this company that we've talked about most of this year, actually called Satellogic, that is involved in several efforts to securitize nature, and turn basically things like the Amazon rainforest into, tradable financial products that don't actually conserve anything but are framed as that.
Whitney Webb raises alarms about the growing alliance between cryptocurrency, fiat systems, and environmental finance. While Bitcoin has long been championed as a challenger to fiat, recent statements by figures like Trump suggest a troubling shift. Bitcoin may strengthen the dollar rather than replace it. Webb also warns that stablecoins and climate finance are being weaponized to perpetuate a debt-driven system, with natural resources like the Amazon being turned into tradable financial assets, leaving environmental conservation and accountability in the dust. Whitney Webb warns of a looming global carbon market that could strip away national sovereignty in Latin America, all under the guise of climate action. She points out how powerful figures, like James Paulson, are being considered for key economic positions despite their roles in past financial crises. Webb highlights the growing push for Bitcoin dollar stablecoins, which could solidify financial control. She urges resistance against these efforts, fearing they'll perpetuate wealth extraction and worsen global inequality. Let's watch more clips from the interview.
And then, this effort to basically install a predatory global carbon market over Latin America that at the same time it ends local and national sovereignty, or would de facto end it and lead toward a more regional government block, and try and build out like a smart power grid and 5G stuff throughout the continent under the guise of conserving it and ending climate change. Ultimately, as I've argued in that, and Mark and I have argued in some of our other pieces, the goal is really just to use that stuff to shovel debt someplace. And even, RFK Jr.'s former VP pick, Nicole Shanahan, she's led research projects about how to facilitate quantitative easing by quantitatively easing into carbon sequestration projects and tokenized carbon credits and carbon coins and all of this stuff. So this is something that is definitely being talked about by figures that are around the current administration. And if there is a debt crisis, even though, Trump pulled people out of the Paris Accords and all of that stuff, Elon Musk quit all the advisory panels and councils he was on in the first Trump administration because Trump ended the U.S.'s commitment to the Paris agreements, right? But this time he's obviously come back in a big way, and as recently as February was pushing for carbon taxes and some other form of carbon pricing, and has been a big advocate for that for really several years. And he's really not the only one. There's a lot of Republicans actually that were pushing for carbon taxes when Trump was in office last time. He didn't listen to them, but if it's considered or framed as necessary because of a debt crisis or something like that, the tune may change. And, with someone like Lutnick, who's he's not Larry Fink, but he's certainly not like an anti-ESG guy and not an anti-climate finance guy. And if you look into carbon markets or any of this other stuff, the reason they've been failing is because they're exposed time and time again as scams. So now the new thing is to frame them as high integrity carbon markets. We need high integrity carbon markets, but you're never going to get a freaking high integrity carbon market when it's criminal bankers making them up, because criminal bankers do one thing, and that's steal, And so, that's what the carbon market they will do. It's essentially inevitable.
What was Fink saying? He was like, I'm sick of everyone talking about how this is the most important election. We work with both parties. Like, who gives a shit? He didn't say gives a shit, but
that is unfortunate. You have Kamala's economic team and Biden's economic team essentially being run by BlackRock executives. And then, when Trump was in office last time, Larry Fink had basically, BlackRock designed the U.S. fiscal response to COVID that they began implementing before a pandemic was even declared. And it resulted in one of the biggest, wealth transfers in American history, and printed more money than at any other time in U.S. history. And, that was BlackRock, and they're not going away. And the fact that Fink is like, we work with both administrations. They worked with Obama during 2008. They worked with Trump, and they worked with Biden, and would have worked with Kamala. He's retired the term ESG, and uses things like sustainable investing and climate finance and other terms now. But he openly says that it was never about conservation or saving the planet. It's about profits. And if you look at Larry Fink's track record, like what I just mentioned with COVID fiscal policy, their track record is basically stealing wealth from the public and then using control they take over corporations or pension funds or, other things like that to try and force behavioral changes among corporations and the American public. And what sort of behavioral changes does Larry Fink want? What concerns me is that one of the top people being floated for a Treasury Secretary position under the new Trump administration is this James Paulson guy, who was one of the most successful 2008 criminals and made more money than anyone else, but really should have been prosecuted for the way he did that, because the bank he worked with, Goldman Sachs, actually ended up sort of getting prosecuted for it. No one was really prosecuted in 2008, but there were civil cases, very few. And this, it was like called Abacus, and there was another one that Paulson and Goldman Sachs worked on together. And that was one of the few that was so egregious it actually resulted in a civil lawsuit, even though, yes, no bankers went to jail, no banks were really punished. There were some fines, handed out, but there was really no accountability. And when you have that scale of wealth transfer and theft happen with no accountability, you can be sure that the same people responsible for that were like, we can continue to fleece the public and steal more if we do it the right way. You know, and as I understand it, the other pick is Scott Bessent, who is a former money manager for George Soros, which, you know, doesn't necessarily appeal to me either, or at least doesn't suggest that it will be fundamentally, you know, different than maybe preceding Treasury Secretary policy at the end of the day. But again, we will see. Hopefully it will be someone not that terrible. And there are some people in his camp that are big, sound money people and backing the dollar with something of substance. Maybe something will come of that. But what has been most telegraphed has generally been this Bitcoin dollar stablecoin play that we discussed earlier. But given that those people are in the Trump camp, if people want to see something different, they should push to have those people elevated over people like Paulson, who, you know, used credit default swap fuckery to make $1 bazillion at the expense of lots of other people.
The troubling reality is that carbon markets, in their current form, are not just failing. They are actively deepening the problems they claim to address. While they create an illusion of progress, the actual results reveal a system designed to sustain the power of financial elites. This isn't just about flawed policies. It's a deliberate strategy that prioritizes profit over the environment and people's well-being. One of the most alarming aspects is how these markets often operate without meaningful oversight. The lack of transparency allows those in power to manipulate systems with little accountability. Offset schemes, for example, have been criticized for funding dubious projects that fail to reduce emissions, while corporations use them as a license to pollute. The public is left believing in a solution that, in reality, is a smokescreen for continued environmental harm. Webb's insights also highlight how deeply entrenched this corruption is. When the same individuals responsible for past economic crises are placed in key positions to oversee these systems, it raises serious questions about who these markets are truly designed to serve. The push for global carbon markets risks consolidating power in ways that undermine local governance and sovereignty, especially in vulnerable regions like Latin America. The weaponization of financial tools like stablecoins only adds to the complexity, creating a financial ecosystem where the environment becomes collateral in a debt-driven economy. This could result in irreversible consequences for both the planet and its people. To move forward, the world must demand a fundamental restructuring of how carbon markets operate. Without mechanisms for genuine accountability and an emphasis on equitable solutions, these markets will continue to widen the gap between the powerful and the powerless, leaving environmental destruction and social inequality in their wake. As we wrap up, do you believe bankers and financiers influence the success or failure of carbon markets? Do you believe Bitcoin may end up strengthening the dollar rather than replacing it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.